In 1927, a Nicaraguan man named Augusto César Sandino sat down and wrote a manifesto. He wasn't a government official, but he had been a commander in the Liberal Army, one of the factions the United States had just brokered a peace between, before an American envoy arrived in Managua, negotiated a settlement, and asked both sides to disarm. Both sides agreed, but Sandino did not. His argument was direct. Nicaragua's sovereignty was not a variable in an American negotiation. He returned to the mountains of Las Segovias, and for the next 7 years he fought the United States Marine Corps to a standstill.
I am Nicaraguan, and proud that in my veins flows, above all, the blood of the Indian, whose regeneration contains the secret of being a loyal and sincere patriot. The sovereignty and freedom of a people are not to be discussed, but rather defended with weapons in hand. Augusto César Sandino, Political Manifesto, 1927. The source is Sergio Ramirez. Sandino, The Testimony of a Nicaraguan Patriot, 1921 through 1934, Princeton University Press, 1990.
Welcome back to Farms and Frontlines. I'm your host, Max Terzano, and I'm joined as always by Jessica Rudo.
Hello.
And last episode, Jess and I covered Haiti and the Dominican Republic, two occupations, covered nearly 2 decades, and when the Marines finally left, they left behind the institutional infrastructure that produced a dictator in Rafael Trujillo. This episode, we're finding ourselves in Nicaragua. A country where in 1927, one man refused to agree to peace on American terms and spent 7 years in the mountains proving the Marines could not make him. Side note, have you seen a picture of Sandino?
Yeah.
I was very surprised when I saw it. Like,
yeah.
He'll definitely be in our newsletter, because I was like, oh, he's just a little guy.
Yeah, look at this little guy.
He's just a little guy.
Feisty little thing.
Wow, all right. Way to go, man.
Brian was told that his whole life, which is why he spent
like,
7 years in the mountains.
No. Yeah.
You can't make me Marines.
No. So he spent 7 years in the mountains proving the Marines couldn't make him come to peace on American terms, right?
Yeah.
And in possibly the cruelest sequence this series has produced so far, when he finally did come down from the mountains in 1934, he negotiated peace with the Nicaraguan government. He attended a dinner at the presidential palace, and on his way home, the commander of the U.S.-trained National Guard had him arrested and shot.
Yeah. The Nicaraguan National Guard, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so he was Nicaraguan, and we will definitely get into that, because we're putting the cart before the horse here, but it's just like, So the man who did that became Nicaragua's dictator for 20 years. The dynasty he founded lasted until 1979, and the revolution that would eventually end it named itself after the man he killed, as you and I have talked about many times in the past, the Sandinistas.
That's right, yeah.
Obviously, Jess, this series is called Farms and Frontlines.
Oh.
Where sometimes we occasionally talk about food. We often get sidetracked by the history around the food.
Yes.
But we do like to talk about food on occasion. So every episode so far has shown you kind of like the farm side of that equation when in our Banana Wars episodes, except for really Panama, but that was for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
You know, we had the concessions, the plantations, the export corridor, all that stuff. But Nicaragua's big crop wasn't bananas. It was coffee, grown in the highlands, exported through Pacific ports, owned by a Nicaraguan landowning class with its own complicated relationship with foreign capital. And yet, by 1909, it didn't matter. The banana companies had spent 30 years building a web across the Caribbean basin. Nicaragua didn't need to be inside that web directly. The web was already everywhere, surrounding it. No escaping it. And any government that moved against American commercial interests became a problem Washington felt entitled to solve. And I think like that is kind of like how Nicaragua really gets involved here. Like there was the potential for it to disrupt the systems that it had in place in the Caribbean, right?
Right.
The fruit companies were the advance guard of American empire in Central America. Not in a conspiratorial sense, but in a structural one. They arrived before the diplomats, before the banks, and well before the Marines. They built the infrastructure. They trained the local elites to expect foreign capital and to depend on it. They demonstrated repeatedly that a small country's government could be pressured, replaced, or ignored if it threatened the terms under which that capital operated. The Marines didn't invent the logic. They enforced it when the other instruments failed. John Solari, Banana Cultures, Agriculture, Consumption, and Environmental Change in Honduras and the United States. University of Texas Press, 2005.
So one more thing that food made possible that's easy to miss. Made American consumers invested in Caribbean stability without even knowing it. By 1910, the banana was the cheapest fruit in the United States. Cheaper than apples, cheaper than oranges, a penny a banana. And we talked previously about how when bananas were first introduced, they were not cheap.
No,
They
it
were
was like
kind of
$1 a banana or something
yeah, it
insane.
was
Yeah.
like avocados. Like, oh, you
Mhm.
put this with at your fancy dinner parties. You rich
You eat
people
it
can
with
have it.
steak. That's right.
Celebrities are eating bananas,
It
like
was like, have lobster and a banana.
and a banana. Yeah, as time-tested tradition.
Can I tell you a random side fact about bananas then?
Absolutely.
So before 1950s, there were like different types of bananas, like different genes or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Different types. And the kind that everybody liked, it was named Big Mike.
Big
You
Mike.
had a banana, you're having a Big
A
Mike
Big
banana.
Mike. All right, everybody. I want you all to say whenever you want a banana, I could really go for a Big Mike.
You can't now, though. That's the thing. Because everybody liked Big Mike, all the producers switched to that type of banana, but it became super susceptible to like diseases. So it was called the
Ugh.
Panama disease, wiped them all out. So we don't
Wow.
have Big
See,
Mikes anymore,
I knew Panama was in fact related to bananas.
Yeah, so
It
there we
all
go.
ties together. I think we need another bumper sticker like Farms and Frontlines. Hand me a Big Mike.
It all ties back to bananas.
It's all bananas.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of bananas, it became super affordable, right? Cheaper than
Mhm, yeah.
apples, cheaper than oranges, a penny a banana. Working class families could afford it. School children ate it. It was by caloric value percent spent, one of the most efficient foods available to poor Americans. That ordinariness wasn't incidental. It meant that the commercial system the banana companies had built, with its concessions and its railroads and its dependent governments, was invisible inside the daily life of ordinary American consumers. They were, quote unquote, eating the empire and just obviously didn't call it that.
I think that's really interesting to point out. So that's 1910, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we did an episode on avocados, it is something that I think still exists. Like you're eating this empire, if you will. Like
Mm-hmm.
for avocados, you're eating this like cartel extortion infrastructure.
Yeah.
But you don't know it because it's just a benign fruit, right? It's just this thing that you're eating and you don't think anything else about it. But
Exactly.
the steps that it had to take to get to your table, like, are just, there's
Bananas.
just so much in there. Yeah, it's just so bananas.
If we get people saying, man, this is avocados, then we're really
We've
onto
gone too
something.
far.
We've gone too far. Back it up, call it in. So Nicaragua is where you see what happens when the logic of the Banana Republic, external control of land, resources, governments in the name of commercial stability, get applied to a country where there's no banana crop to point to. The United States intervened in Nicaragua not because of what Nicaragua produced, but because of where it sat. Above the canal, below Honduras, in the middle of a Caribbean basin that American food commerce had already remade in its own image. The food built the foothold. Nicaragua is what happens when the system doesn't work as planned.
So when you think about a canal, one tends to think of Panama. But for much of the 19th century, the canal everyone expected to be built was not in Panama. It was in Nicaragua.
Nicaragua!
Sacre bleu. But wait.
Wait, no, those are the French
No,
down in Panama
I
still.
know. But no, they would still be in Nicaragua.
Oh, you're right. That's what they're
right.
saying when they're realizing
Aha!
it's not working.
Yeah. Sacre bleu. Its geography made it uniquely attractive. Ships could travel up the San Juan River from the Caribbean, cross Lake Nicaragua, and complete only a short overland journey to the Pacific. Interest intensified during the California Gold Rush when Cornelius Vanderbilt developed a profitable transit route through the country.
That's so fascinating.
I know. When you like the whole series, Who Built America, like Vanderbilt is massively important to that, like good and bad,
Yeah.
Both Great Britain and the United States quickly recognized the strategic importance of any future canal, leading to the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, in which both powers agreed neither would exclusively control one.
I see that worked out really well.
Yeah, I know.
Good treaty, gang.
Nicaragua then descended into instability during the 1850s, including this weirdly bizarre episode with a guy named William Walker. He was an American mercenary who exploited a civil war in Nicaragua. So I'm going to just go into a little more detail about that because
Heck yeah.
it's just like all things Latin American history are like, what? That's wild.
Yeah.
So he was the head of a filibuster, and a filibuster at this time period means a private military adventurer.
Hmm.
Um, like a
So kind of
mercenary, you know.
like a mercenary. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. They just called it a filibuster, which is also kind of funny that what
That's
we call a filibuster
actually
now.
hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. 1855, Nicaragua was in a civil war between political factions, and that's like kind of all I'll say about that.
Hmm.
Walker arrives with a tiny army, and he is convinced that Americans need to spread their control across Latin America for the good of mankind. And it's not an unusual sentiment, but he takes it to like a weird extreme.
Okay.
Um,
Kind of like a manifest southerly.
yeah, yeah. Like he needs to do this himself in this area
Right.
where everybody else is like, I think it'd be for good, but he is like, I'm gonna take a tiny army there and like make this happen. And within a year, he is in control of the country. He's controlled the country, and he declared himself president.
Wow.
He made English the national language. He invited American settlers to come down, and then but he also restored slavery. Like,
Huh.
yeah, like what are you doing, dude?
Hmm.
It's not the way that it ends, it's the countries around Nicaragua. So it's Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are like, absolutely not, dude. This could
We
be,
knew.
yeah, they're like, no way. Because if he is like seen as successful, it's going to invite
Yeah.
other crazy gringos to come
Yep.
down and try to do the same thing. So they raise up against Walker and they defeat him in 1857. Um, Walker kept trying to come back. But he's eventually captured and then he's actually executed in 1860.
That is a wild story. And I mean, like, this is not the first story we've talked about a mercenary taking a little army and going and overthrowing a
Right,
country.
right. That's why I wanted to bring it up
Crazy.
too, because it's not a one-off.
Yeah, it's sadly not a one-off in Central America. This is
I know.
insane.
So so we're back to right Nicaragua and the US. So by late
Hmm.
18 by late 19th century, the United States debated building a canal through either Nicaragua or Panama. Ultimately, the US chooses Panama in 1904 after a failed French canal project there. We talk about in our Panama Canal, right? All there's a whole bunch going on behind the scenes into why the US chooses Panama. But if
Yeah.
you want to know more, listen to that one. And then there's growing American strategic ambitions after the Spanish-American War.
Yep, that makes sense. We talked about that in our Cuba episode.
Mhm. So even after Panama is selected, Nicaragua remains strategically important because American leaders feared rival powers might someday build a competing canal there.
Okay, that
But
tracks. Yeah.
we can't have another canal if the U.S. canal is cut off, right?
Right.
Because then what's the point of doing it? Those fears intensified under Nicaraguan President Jose Santos Zelaya, who ruled from 1893 to 1909 and sought greater independence from the United States, which makes sense.
Hmm.
Zelaya wanted Nicaragua to have leverage, and they used the canal to do that. He began exploring possible relationship with foreign powers, to include Germany, to include Japan, and possibly Great Britain regarding Panama develop. I'm sorry, not Panama, including
Right.
canal development and foreign investment. To American policymakers, this was deeply alarming. Remember, the U.S. was already building a canal in Panama. It's a huge
Hmm.
endeavor. The idea that Germany or Japan could gain strategic influence in Nicaragua and potentially control a future canal looked like a direct threat to American hemisphere dominance.
Yeah, and
That's
this
the
is the whole thing right there, right?
hmm
Like the Roosevelt
hmm
corollary, the Monroe Doctrine was all like this hemisphere is our hemisphere.
right.
It's just a bonkers thing to think about. Like I know it's just history, so like we talk about it and like yeah, they said this is our hemisphere, but it's like whoa.
I
But
don't
this is
know.
how
I think
serious it was, right? Like you'd
yeah.
think another canal, that's great for world commerce, and it's
I,
like no.
I know you say this is history, but I would highly recommend you read the National Defense Strategy of 2026 and see what it says in there because it's hemispheric control.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's why we talk about Greenland and
Yep.
Cuba and Venezuela and all these things. Like that's
Hmm.
yeah. So yeah. Anyway, um back to 1909. Two Americans were fighting alongside anti-Zelaya rebels. They were caught by the Nicaraguan, army and
Mhm.
executed. The United States used that incident as justification to support the rebellion against that Nicaraguan president, Zelaya.
Mm.
And under intense pressure, Zelaya resigned and fled the country.
Zelaya's offense, from Washington's perspective, was not corruption or instability in the conventional sense. His offense was behaving as though Nicaragua were a sovereign state with the right to negotiate with whomever it chose. He was also anti-American in tone, hostile to U.S. business interests in Nicaragua, and willing to use Nicaragua's geographic position as a bargaining chip. In the logic of the Monroe Doctrine, as Theodore Roosevelt and his successor had extended it, this combination was unacceptable. Mikhail Gabat, Confronting the American Dream, Nicaragua under U.S. Imperial Rule, Duke University Press, 2005.
So that's bringing us to 1909. In December of that year, Secretary of State Philander Knox, the same Knox who designed dollar diplomacy, the same Knox who appears in the Honduras episode recognizing the government that followed Sam Zamura's coup, issued a note effectively demanding Zelaya's resignation. The note made clear that the United States considers Zelaya's government illegitimate. And then, like I said, Zelaya resigned a few days later.
Crazy.
I know. Political instability followed. Shock. In 1912, the U.S. backed the conservative government when it faced revolt. When the revolt threatened to succeed, Marines landed. A small Marine contingent remained in Managua almost continuously from 1912 to 1925. The crisis marked a turning point in American dominance over Central America and led to the Bryan-Chamorro Treaty of 1914.
The government of Nicaragua grants in perpetuity to the government of the United States, forever free from all taxation or other public charge, the exclusive proprietary rights necessary and convenient for the construction, operation, and maintenance of an interoceanic canal. Bryan-Chamorro Treaty, August 5th, 1914. Full text available at Avalon Project, Yale Law School.
The Bryan-Chamorro Treaty gave the United States exclusive rights to build a canal through Nicaragua, a naval base lease in the Gulf of Fonseca, and a lease on the Corn Islands in exchange for $3 million.
Why do you think they're called the Corn Islands, Jess?
I think that's where they were growing coffee.
Probably, right? Lots of coffee on the Corn Islands.
Which this I don't know. So the lease on Corn Island, so that's for the U.S. But then when you look up Corn Island now, it's the Great
British
Corn Island.
Yeah.
Great Corn Island.
Great Britain, Great Corn Island.
Yeah. So I guess we were like, sorry about that.
They were probably like, we got enough corn. We got Iowa. We got Nebraska. We're good.
So that was all for $3 million. Gotcha. Nicaragua received the money. The United States received the rights in perpetuity. The treaty was widely understood then and since as designed to prevent any other power from building a competing canal, not to actually build one. So again, this was just to stop anybody else from building it.
Right.
The U.S. had literally zero intentions of building a canal there, even though that's what the treaty is saying to do.
Saying we're going to build a canal. Nobody else do it. And then just not building a canal.
Yeah. But like the U.S. knew the whole time, like we are not actually building a canal.
The Bryan-Chamorro Treaty immediately drew legal challenges from Costa Rica and El Salvador, whose territorial waters and rights were affected by the provisions the United States and Nicaragua had negotiated without consulting them. Both countries brought the dispute to the Central American Court of Justice. The court ruled against the United States and Nicaragua on both claims. The United States ignored the ruling. The court lost its legitimacy and effectively ceased to function. An international legal institution created partly under U.S. auspices was destroyed when it ruled against U.S. interests. Lester D. Langley, The Banana Wars, Rowman and Littlefield, 2002.
The Marines in 1925 finally withdrew. Within months, civil war broke out between liberal and conservative factions. In 1926, the Marines returned.
That happens so frequently in the Caribbean in this time period.
Yeah.
They leave to come back. They leave to come back.
Yeah. The United States sent Henry Stimson, lawyer, former Secretary of War under Taft, future Secretary of State under Hoover, and Secretary of War again under Roosevelt when World War II breaks out, to broker a peace. Stimson arrived in Nicaragua in April of 1927, and then within weeks he had negotiated a settlement, the Espino Negro Pact. Both the liberal and conservative factions agreed to disarm. Both agreed to U.S. supervise elections, and then, for all intents and purposes, the Civil War was over. However, one man decided, no, it's not.
It was not.
It
I want to
was
take a
not
just
over.
quick second to talk about Henry Stimson, just to point out who he is. Like, if
Yeah,
you're a big history buff, you're probably familiar with Henry Stimson. But we were talking earlier and talking about how, I mean, he was, like just mentioned, Secretary of War under Taft, Secretary of State under Hoover, Secretary of War again under Roosevelt and Truman. He was also essentially project manager for the Manhattan Project.
busy.
Yeah, like the supervisor for the Manhattan Project. He was the one who, as far as I know, and feel free to write in and correct me on this, but he was the one who decided where to drop, who advised the president on where to drop the atomic bombs. Like he decided against Kyoto for a third bomb because it was like too much. So it's just fascinating that he's down here brokering this peace between the factions in Nicaragua as well.
Yeah, I think it's the history of Kyoto that they decided it was too much. They asked to take it off the considerations list for the atomic bombs.
Hmm. Imagine being the person who's like, where are we going to drop this? Like that's,
I can send you, it's declassified now.
oh
It
yeah.
was it was actually first classified ultra top secret, but they're
Oh wow.
declassified now, but I can send you some of that if you want to look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah, I would love to.
I
I
used it
mean,
for my
just
classes, yeah.
okay. That's pretty cool.
Because Nagasaki was not the original target.
What
It
was?
was the other one.
Oh, the other one. That's what, you know what? I was going to say that.
There's four on the list, right? Kyoto's taken off. Hiroshima is the other one. Nagasaki was the backup to the other city I can't think of.
All right, well, sign up for our newsletter to find out what the other city was. We'll put it
Yeah,
on
I'll
there.
look it up when we're done and then we could add it in
Perfect.
there.
Sandino was born in 1895 in Niquino, a small town in the department of Masaya.
Hmm.
His father was a landowner. His mother was an indigenous servant. He grew up as his father's illegitimate son, present in the household but not fully of it. This was not an unusual origin story for Nicaragua in the late 19th century. It's shaped, by his own account, how he understood belonging. In the 1920s, Sandino worked in Mexico, in the Tampico oil fields, in a period when the Mexican labor movement and international left were actively engaged in the region. He encountered labor organizing, anarcho-syndicalist ideals, and what he would later describe as a larger understanding of imperialism. He returned to Nicaragua in 1926 to join the liberal side of the Civil War. When the Espino Negro Pact was signed in May 1927, Sandino was a liberal general commanding forces in the northern mountains. He refused to sign. He sent Stimson a letter explaining why.
I will not sell out. I will not surrender. Only death will put an end to my resistance. I am not fighting for positions of government. I am fighting for the right of Nicaragua to determine its own future without foreign interference. That right is not negotiable. Augusto César Sandino, letter to Henry Stimson, 1927.
The Marines deployed into Las Segovias in force. They brought with them a set of advantages that should have been decisive: air support, superior weapons, logistical backing, professional training. What they encountered was a guerrilla campaign in terrain that did not reward those advantages.
The Las Segovias mountains of northern Nicaragua are high, heavily forested, and cut by rivers that become impassable in the rainy season. Sandino's forces knew the terrain. They moved through it. The Marines controlled the roads and the lowland towns. Sandino controlled the mountains. His forces could not hold any position the Marines chose to attack in strength. The Marines could not find Sandino when he did not want to be found. This is the structural condition of guerrilla warfare, and is what the Marines could not resolve through firepower alone. Neil Macaulay, The Sandino Affair, Duke University Press, 1967.
Yes, we know guerrilla warfare is very difficult to fight against,
Yeah.
just
Yep.
from any number of wars the U.S. has
Yeah.
fought in. The mountains really benefited Sandino, and I mean, he previously was commanding forces in the mountains. He was very familiar with them.
That's right. And yeah, knowing the terrain is huge.
Absolutely. The Marines' response included one of the earliest uses of aerial bombardment and counterinsurgency in the Western Hemisphere. Aircraft were used to attack Sandino's positions in the mountains, in some cases attacking villages. The tactic produced casualties, unsurprisingly.
Mm.
It did not produce victory, and it produced press coverage, which has been kind of a big deal in the last couple episodes that we've talked
Yeah.
about. Whether it's Bernays or the
Hmm.
articles in the Nation,
Hmm.
one way or the other, press coverage is a big deal.
Mm.
In January 1928, an American journalist named Carlton Beals traveled to the Las Segovias Mountains and interviewed Sandino.
So the American journalists could find him,
Mhm.
but the Marines could not.
Yes, I don't know how that went. Like, how does an American journalist like end up in the mountains and just like, hello, I'm here to interview your leader.
Take me to him.
Promise you, I'm not a soldier. I am a journalist. Like, and
I
they're
have
just like,
integrity.
you know what? Great.
I see you have a press badge. I believe you now.
Yeah, right. Like a little hat with the press. I don't know, but yeah, he was able to go up there and he interviewed Sandino,
Yeah.
and his articles appeared in none other than The Nation
Hmm.
in February and March of the same year, 1928. They were the first sympathetic American press portrait of Sandino. They were also the first time an American readership saw the Nicaraguan campaign described from the mountains rather than from the Marine Corps briefings.
Sandino is not a bandit. He's a man with a cause, a force with an argument. The Marines call him a criminal because they cannot call him what he is. A Nicaraguan who does not accept that American interests and Nicaraguan sovereignty are the same thing. Carlton Beals, with Sandino in Nicaragua, The Nation, February and March 1928.
So, who was Sandino beyond the symbol the U.S. State Department and the Latin American left both made of him? His politics were genuinely hybrid. Nationalism was primary. He framed his fight as the defense of Nicaraguan sovereignty against a specific foreign power, not as a class war or a socialist revolution. He used racial and indigenous language that is underreported in most American accounts. He described himself explicitly as of indigenous blood and framed the fight in terms of the dignity of the original inhabitants of the Americas against European descended imperial power. He was influenced by spiritualism and mysticism as well as by political ideology. He was not a communist. The Comintern never directed his operation, and the State Department's claim of Soviet funding were not supported by evidence. That pesky little thing.
What made Sandino remarkable as a military commander, in addition to his political clarity, was his ability to maintain discipline over his forces across 7 years of guerrilla war with no external supply line, no safe haven across a border, and no state sponsoring his operations. His fighters came from the rural communities of northern Nicaragua, the peasants, miners, and agricultural laborers of Las Segovias. They were fighting in and for their own terrain. That is a military and political fact the Marines' firepower could not address. Macaulay, The Sandino Affair.
By 1932, the military campaign had produced a clear pattern. Sandino's forces could not be decisively defeated. The Marines controlled the lowlands, the mountains remained contested. Each year, the political cost of the campaign in the United States rose. The press coverage, the congressional questions, the awareness that the Marines were fighting an unwinnable war in the Nicaraguan highlands, and each year the strategic objective, a stable, American-friendly Nicaragua, receded further. The good neighbor policy was coming. Nicaragua was the reason it came.
In January 1933, the U.S. Marines withdrew again from Nicaragua under the framework of the Good Neighbor policy. The withdrawal had been coming since the Hoover administration, and it accelerated under Roosevelt. The formula was the same one that had ended the Dominican and Haitian occupations. U.S. forces leave, U.S. trained local institutions remain. The institution the Marines left behind in Nicaragua was the Guardia Nacional. The Guardia had been organized and trained by Marine officers along the same lines as the Gendarmerie in Haiti and the Guardia Nacional in the Dominican Republic. It was, on paper, a professional Nicaraguan military force. Its commander was a Nicaraguan officer named Anastasio Somoza Garcia.
Somoza was effusively pro-American at all times. a stance that led people to believe that Washington reciprocated, notwithstanding the reality. He recognized early that a non-interventionist policy by the United States could work in his favor and eventually allow him to take power, even through force, without Washington's interference. Paul Coe Clark, Jr., The United States and Somoza, 1933 through 1956, a revisionist look. Prager, 1992.
The Marines withdrew. Sandino came down from the mountains. He had negotiated a peace agreement with the new liberal government. The agreement gave his fighters a year to disarm, granted an amnesty, and provided land in the north for the demobilizing forces. Sandino accepted these terms. He was, by all accounts, satisfied. The Marines were gone. Nicaragua's sovereignty had been restored, at least in form. He had won what he had been fighting for. On February 21st, 1934, Sandino attended a dinner at the presidential palace in Managua. He dined with President Sacasa. The evening was cordial. Sandino left the palace at approximately 10 o'clock. On the road from the palace, his car was stopped by Guardia Nacional soldiers. Sandino and several of his generals were arrested on the orders of Anastasio Somoza Garcia. They were taken to the field near the Managua airstrip, and they were shot.
Everything has been arranged. The Guardia has the order. Tonight is the night. Anastasio Somoza Garcia reported statement to Guardia officers, February 21st, 1934.
Somoza had not asked the U.S. State Department for permission. The evidence suggested that U.S. Ambassador Arthur Bliss Lane was not consulted, was initially disturbed by the assassination, and registered a private protest. What good does that do? The State Department accepted the outcome. The machinery of the good neighbor policy did not include a mechanism to reverse a decision of the institutions it had created, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
What is considered a success, and then what happens when the second and third order effects come to be because of whatever actions were started.
Right. It's not the same, but it kind of reminds me of when the Secret Service tried to stop Zimmer from sailing and don't go do a coup. And then he did, and they're just like, oh, okay.
Okay, now what? Yeah.
Yeah, well, we see it.
But then also, using the policy to be like, okay, but now we can't do anything because this is literally why we set this policy up, because we were doing things.
Exactly. Yep. It's just kind of living with the consequences, right? We did this, we put these people here, and
yeah, I kind of wish there was some common sense applied to some of these things. Okay, this thing happened, we should address it. That doesn't mean you need to send Marines in, but it should be addressed. I don't know.
Exactly. And then, what happens afterwards is Somoza Garcia overthrows the government and becomes, with the Guardia Nacional, overthrows the, rightful president of Sacasa.
Yeah.
And rules until what, 79?
Yep.
Him and his children. They should have at least had the foresight to be like, okay, well, killing him was not good, but overthrowing the government
also not good.
Yeah, also not good. And we're good neighbors, so we're going to stop that.
Right.
It says so in our policy.
Yeah. Easy to say that now because hindsight is 50-50.
So the good neighbor policy is the point at which U.S. foreign policy in the Caribbean and Central America changes its methods without changing its goals. We talked a little bit about this in the past. Every previous episode in the series has shown the system working. The Platt Amendment, the Canal Zone, the concession system, the occupations. Each instrument was calibrated to the same purpose. External control of political and economic outcomes in small sovereign states justified as the protection of American interests and of the states themselves from their own instability. Nicaragua showed that one of those instruments, the direct military occupations with Marines in the mountains, had limits. It couldn't govern a country whose mountainous terrain made guerrilla war viable. It could not absorb the political cost of an indefinite counterinsurgency campaign. It couldn't shoot its way to the stability it had been sent to produce. So the instrument changed. The Marines left. The constabulary stayed. The constabulary produced the dictator. Sounds super familiar to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, the dictator's family ruled for 43 years. The revolution that ended it named itself after the man the constabulary's first commander had killed.
The good neighbor policy is usually taught as a break from the Banana Wars era, as the moment the United States renounced intervention and began treating Latin American states as genuine partners. The historical record supports a more complicated reading. The policy renounced the use of direct military force. It did not renounce the goal of shaping political outcomes. What it traded was the method, from Marines in the mountains to constabularies commanded by American-trained officers, from direct occupation to indirect influence. The outcomes of Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic suggest the trade was effective, from Washington's perspective, at lower political cost. Alan McPherson, The Invaded. Oxford University Press, 2014.
Cuba had a constitutional cause. Panama had a canal zone. Honduras had a concession system. Haiti and the Dominican Republic had the occupations themselves. Nicaragua had all of those. And then it had Sandino. And when Sandino came down from the mountains, they killed him and left behind the man who did it. When you think of all of these countries, as we've talked about them kind of like in order and all the things that happened, Nicaragua really is the inevitable culmination, right? Like where things just didn't go to plan for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really did have like almost all those things. Like Sandino and his guerrilla fighters just wouldn't give up for long enough that it got, like we mentioned, the congressional questions, the press was involved.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Our next and final episode for the Banana Wars series is Guatemala, a country where the system encounters a democratically elected government that attempts land reform, proposes to redistribute idle land from the largest landowner in the country to landless peasants, the landowner being United Fruit Company, which we talked about when we've talked about Bernays in the past.
Mm-hmm.
The response is not Marines. The Marines are gone. However, it evolved into the CIA. A radio transmitter in Honduras, and a coup the United States will not acknowledge for 40 years. Guatemala is where the Banana Wars end and something else begins, where we see a culmination of all of these systems that have been building in the Caribbean, coming to an end with the good neighbor policy and how the way that they've been attacking these systems has changed. Like the era of just throwing Marines at problems was over, right?
Right.
So tune in next episode if you're interested in hearing how all this ends. And after that, we will have a capstone episode with Dr. Michael Kangemi talk about Guatemala after all of the just after. You'll see what happens next episode. Please rate the podcast, give us a follow wherever you listen. And if you want to write to us, you can reach us at farmsandfrontlines@gmail.com and sign up for our newsletter at farmsandfrontlines.substack.com. There's always a bunch of extra tidbits we put in there, whether it's bloopers or bios or just cool things we found out that didn't make the episode. You can find them there.
And all the sources, I think, end up in there.
All of our sources that we use for the episodes are in there as well, if you're interested in that. So thanks again, and we will see you next episode.
All right, talk to you later.